Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to another interested webinar of Ministry of Security. So I'm Niranjan and I would be the speaker for today's session. So I coach and mentor InfoSec professionals on ISO 27001 and I've been helping organizations with multiple InfoSec standards and audits. So that's about me. I'm all excited and I know you guys have been waiting for a webinar for a very long time. So without wasting time, let's get started with the most anticipated webinar, the NIST CSF 2.0 implementation. So in today's webinar, we would be first understanding the introduction or overview to the NIST CSF standard. Then we'll understand what is the structure of the NIST CSF standard. Then we'll deep dive into the requirements and understand the CSF core, the organizational profiles, the CSF tiers, and at last, we will focus on understanding how to implement and what are the best practices for the requirements that are specified in the NIST CSF core. But first, we have the introduction. So, overview of NIST CSF. So, the NIST CSF is a voluntary framework developed by NIST to help organizations manage and reduce cybersecurity risks. So, it provides a common language for cybersecurity risk management and serves as a flexible, adaptable, and cost-effective approach to improving the cybersecurity posture. So the NIST CSF framework is a framework that is developed to help any organization regardless of the service line. So the NIST CSF is applicable to any government entity, to any financial organization or insurance companies, healthcare sector, educational institutes, and also even NGOs. So the NIST CSF basically provides the requirements of what needs to be done, but it is left to the organizations to decide how they are achieving or complying to the requirements. But if you ask me a question that implementation and the use of NIST CSF, would it be same across all these various organizations and various sectors? The answer would be no, because each of these organizations and each of these sector have their own vision, they have their own mission, they have their own objectives and strategies. So the organizations have to customize and implement the requirements based on their needs and requirements. So that was a brief overview of the NIST CSF standard. So let's understand what are the outcomes or what are the advantages of having NIST CSF framework, or if you implement NIST CSF framework in your organization. So at first, NIST CSF ensures that we have a improved cybersecurity posture. Then it helps us to enhance the risk management pro the risk management process within the organization and also a better communication within the organization. So by following the NIST CSF, the organization can enhance their ability to prevent, detect, and respond and recover from cybersecurity incidents. So that's how the cybersecurity posture would be improved or enhanced. And the framework also helps the organization to align their cybersecurity efforts with the overall risk management strategy, ensuring a more holistic approach to cybersecurity, thereby helping the organizations with the enhanced risk management process. And lastly, the framework also provides a common language for communicating the cybersecurity risks and helps the organization to prioritize the processes across all levels of the organizations in order to ensure that the organization is meeting the cybersecurity goals and objectives. Coming at, let's understand the overview of the NIST CSF framework. So at first, let us understand what is the structure of the framework. So the framework has three components: the framework core, the profiles, and the CSF tiers. So the framework core provides a set of cybersecurity activities or outcomes that helps the organization to manage the cybersecurity risks. And coming at the cybersecurity profiles, so these are mechanisms for describing the organization's current cybersecurity posture or a future cybersecurity posture with regards to the outcomes of the CSF framework or the to be precise, the framework core. And lastly, the CSF tiers can be applied to the organizational profiles to characterize, define, and understand the current level of an organization's cybersecurity risk governance and management processes or practices. So moving ahead, let's understand what does the framework core consist of. So the framework core consists of three sections. First, the functions. These functions can be used by any organizations, right? So the requirements, as we discussed earlier, can be used by any organization. So these functions are nothing but the high level outcomes of the framework. So these outcomes or the functions are categorized into various categories, and they are further divided into subcategories. So that's how we get, or that's how we have the framework defined. So let us understand the framework core in depth. So we have six functions. So we have governance, the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So let us understand each of these framework cores on a brief. So the govern function of the NIST CSF, it's all about setting up the rules and, and expectations for the cybersecurity within an organization. So it includes making sure everybody understand what needs to be done to manage cybersecurity risks effectively. It involves creating policies, assigning roles and responsibilities, overseeing the cybersecurity strategy. So essentially, it's about laying down the groundwork to make sure cybersecurity is integrated into the organization's overall risk management strategy. Next, we have the identity function. So this is all about ensuring that the organization is aware about the cybersecurity risks that the organization has. That means if the organization needs to understand what the risks it has, it should have a thorough understanding of all its assets, the data, the information, the applications that the organization use, and also the service providers and its employees. So by identifying these risks, the organization can prioritize where to focus the cybersecurity efforts. Additionally, this functions helps us to spot areas where we can improve our policies, plans, processes, procedures, etc. Coming to the protect function. So this function emphasizes on putting the safeguards in place in order to manage the cybersecurity risks within the organizations. So once we've identified all our assets and risks, the protect function helps us to secure those assets in order to reduce the chances of cyber attacks. So this includes measures like managing identities, controlling access to systems, providing awareness and training to employees, securing the data, and ensuring that we have a resilient technological infrastructure. Next, we have the detect function. So the detect function is the detect function focuses on spotting the possible cybersecurity attacks or compromises within the organization. So it helps us to find and analyze any unusual activities or signs of a cyber attack promptly. So by detecting these anomalies early, so we can respond quickly and effectively in order to minimize the impact of any potential incidents. Then we have the respond function. So this predominantly focuses on how to cater to the cybersecurity incidents that were detected. So it's all about containing the effects of the incident in order to minimize the damage or the impact. So this includes managing the incident, analyzing its impact, mitigating its effects, and communicating about it internally and externally. And finally, we have the recover function, which focuses on restoring the assets or the operations that were affected by the incidents. So the goal is to minimize the impact of the incident and ensure that normal operations resume smoothly. So it's all about bouncing back from a cybersecurity incident as quickly and efficiently possible. So this was a brief overview of all the six functions that we have under the framework core. So we'll deep dive into all the requirements and sub requirements in the upcoming slides. But now we'll understand the organizational profiles. Okay. So The CSF organizational profiles describe the organization's current or the target cybersecurity posture in terms of the core outcomes. So the CSF organizational profile is a tool in order to understand and communicate the organization's cybersecurity posture. So we have three profiles, that is a current profile, the target profile, and the community profile. So the current profile shows what outcomes the organization is currently meeting and how well they are being achieved. So a target profile outlines the desired outcomes the organization aim to achieve in the future. That is what is their target state. And newly community profiles have been launched. These profiles help organizations prioritize actions and communicate their cybersecurity status to the stakeholders. So these community profiles acts as a shared baseline of the CSF outcomes for a specific sector or use. Say for example, if there are profiles available for financial sectors, there are profiles available for insurance domain, profiles available for IT sectors. So these profiles focuses on a particular sector or a particular domain. Now let us understand how can we actually plan, or what are the steps for creating a profile in the organization. So the first step is to scope the organizational profile. So when scoping the organizational profile, we are essentially outlining what aspects of our organization cybersecurity posture the profile will cover. So this includes defining the high level facts and assumptions that will guide the creation of the profile. For example, a profile could address an entire organization or be scoped to a organization's financial systems or organization's IT systems, right? So we can scope out on what systems or on what processes are we trying to develop a profile. And once the scope is done, we need to gather information in order to in order to prepare this organizational profile. For example, we may include information with regards to what are the policies that are present in the organization, what are the risk management priorities, what are the resources that are available in the organization, what is the importance given to the risk management. As the organization completed a business impact analysis, what is its cybersecurity objectives, what are the requirements, what are the other standards and frameworks followed by the organizations, what are the tools that are used in order to manage cybersecurity within the organization. So these are the information which we would predominantly gather so that we can use this data in creating the profile. And then the third step is actually creating the profile itself. So firstly, we identify the CSF outcomes that are relevant to the organization cybersecurity goals and challenges, right? Then we document the needed information for each outcome, such as what are the policies that we have, what are the risk management priorities that the organization have. So whatever information we collected, right, we would be documenting that in the profile. And once we document it, we conduct something called as a gap analysis. That is, in order to bridge the gap between the current state and the target state, we'll have to identify what is the gap that we need to mitigate in order to reach to the current state compared to where we stand actually. And lastly, we develop an action plan in order to remediate or mitigate the gaps that we have identified so that we can move ahead in achieving the target compliance state, or we would be achieving the target profile. So these are the 5 simple steps that any organization can use in order to create a organizational profile. Now let's understand what are these CSF tiers. Okay, so the CSF tiers are a means which will help us to categorize the rigor of an organization's cybersecurity risk governance and management practices. So once we develop an organizational profile, right, so we can use this tiers in order to identify what is the maturity level. Say, is it on a state 1 that is partial? Is it on a state 2 that is risk informed? Is it on a state 3 repeatable? And it is on a state 4 that is adaptive. the 1 being the lowest state and 4 being the highest value. So however, this NIST CSF framework states that CSF tiers are not directly linked to the maturity level. So we can use these CSF tiers in order to give a certain valuation on the current state of the cybersecurity posture. So say as per the tires implementation, we got to know our current state is only 1. So the organization can plan to achieve the state 2 or 3 in the next future, probably say in the next 6 months or the next 1 year. So that can be their target state, so that they can say we have improved from tier 1 to tier 3. That's how we've been progressing the CSF or the infosec posture within the organization. So that's where CSF tiers help us. Now, let us understand the CSF core. We'll understand what are the requirements, what are the sub requirements, and we'll understand what are the best practices for these requirements. So at first, we have the govern function. So as discussed earlier, govern function is all about setting up the rules and expectations for cybersecurity within your organization. So this includes making sure that everybody understand what needs to be done in order to manage cybersecurity risks effectively. So at first, we have the organizational context. So as part of the governance, we need to identify the organization's vision, mission, what are their goals and objectives with regards to information security. We also need to identify who are the internal and external stakeholders and what are their needs and expectations with respect to information security within the organization. We also should emphasize on identifying and complying to all the legal and regulatory requirements that are applicable to the organization and the services that we are delivering to the customers. So we should also identify what the InfoSec objectives of the organization, and these objectives should be in line with the business objectives, so that the information security will always be an enabler to your organization, not a restriction. So all these objectives should also be communicated to all the relevant internal and external stakeholders as necessary. Next, we have the risk management strategy. So this requirement emphasizes on the enterprise risk management program. We need to define and develop an information security risk management program that actually covers the objectives of the ERM, that is the enterprise risk management. We also need to identify the acceptable values of risk, that is our risk appetite, and the acceptable deviations from this risk appetite, that is our risk tolerance. We also have to clearly identify and define what is the methodology or the process that we are using in order to manage risks within the organization. And this risk management methodology should be communicated to all the relevant stakeholders. And also, as part of the risk management program, we also need to emphasize on identifying all possible opportunities for improving the information security posture within the organization. Next, we have the roles, responsibilities, and authorities. So, responsibility refers to the obligation to perform a particular task or comply with a rule. And accountability refers to answerability for a particular outcome or a task. And authority is the empowerment or what is the privilege that an individual possesses, right? So we have to ensure that the top management is taking the responsibility for developing a secure culture within the organization. We need to identify all the roles, responsibilities, and authorities with regards to information security within the organization. And the top management should also ensure that it is providing with the all the necessary resources in terms of people, process, technology, monetary, and time for establishing, maintaining, and improving the information security within the organization. Next, we have the cybersecurity policy or the information security policy. So the cybersecurity policy must be established within the organization, and this should be in line with the organization's vision, mission, strategy. So the policy should be regularly reviewed and updated in order to ensure that it is in line with the organization requirements. And this policy should also include all the requirements with regards to information security, and also it should address all the legal and regulatory requirements and any contractual requirements that the organization has agreed upon. So this information security policy or the cybersecurity policy would be the backbone or the basement or the foundation for the information security program within the organization. Next, we have the oversight. So based on the results of the risk management or the risk assessment or the outcomes of our enterprise risk management program, we need to assess how well the enterprise risk management has helped us in order to achieve these infosec objectives. And if required, we need to modify the risk management strategy so that it better suits the organization's needs. So we also need to develop the KPI metrics in order to monitor and measure the performance of enterprise risk management within the organization. At last, we have the cybersecurity supply chain risk management. So all the risks pertaining to supply chain is emphasized or focused or addressed here. At first, we need to identify these risks, but pertaining to the organization's supply chain, and who within the organization is responsible to address and manage these supply chain risks. So the supply chain risk management should not be considered as a separate program. However, it needs to be integrated with the existing organization's enterprise risk management program. We need to identify the suppliers and prioritize them based on the criticality of the data and the services that they're offering to the organization. So these supply chain risks can be effectively managed by conducting a proper due diligence or risk assessments on the suppliers and the services that the organization would be receiving from them, and all the information security obligations of both the organization and the supplier should be mentioned in the contract so that it is clearly mentioned as to which entity is responsible for what processes of the information security management. And the supplier contracts should also include the process for managing incidents pertaining to the services that are obtained from the supplier. So at next, we have the identify function. So the identify function is all about knowing what are the risks that your organization faces. So that means we have to understand the organization's process, what kind of information the organization has, what are the various assets, what are the various applications, how the data flows, and we also should have an understanding of the various roles within the organizations, the business units, as well as the suppliers. So at first we have the asset management. So this requirement predominantly focuses on the entire asset lifecycle management, starting from procuring the assets, using the assets, and finally disposing these assets. So at first we should have a hardware or a software asset inventory, wherein which this inventory will have all the list of all the hardware and software that the organization has, what is the location of the hardware, who is the owner, who is the custodian for this particular asset, what is the valuation for the asset, and what is the classification for the asset. And each asset should be tagged to a relevant asset owner, right? And we should also have the network data flows, that is the data flow diagram within the organization, in order to understand how the data is entering or what is happening to the data in a particular process, how the data is entering, what is happening to the data, where it is being stored, where it is being sent. So the complete life cycle of data should be captured. We should also have an inventory which has list of all the services and all the suppliers that the organization is having. And finally, we should also have an asset classification process in place. So predominantly this asset classification is done based on the sensitivity and the criticality of the asset. So the very common classifications include top secret, restricted, internal, public, etc. So these classification levels helps us to identify what sorts of information security controls or what levels of controls should be implemented on these assets and the data. Next, we have the risk assessment. So here we understand how the risk assessment should actually be conducted in the organization. So risk has two components. One is a vulnerability and the other component is a threat. So vulnerabilities are the gaps or the defects or the loopholes within the assets or a process. And we need to identify these vulnerabilities as part of the risk assessment as well. Next, we have the threats. So threats are nothing but anything that has a potential to cause harm to our assets or processes. Now, risk is nothing but any event where a threat successfully exploits a vulnerability, causing a negative impact. So, the extent of the impact and the probability of occurrence of a risk needs to be identified and used for calculating the risk levels. That is nothing but analysis of the risk, wherein which we give a certain value to a risk by understanding what is the impact and what is the probability of the occurrence of this risk. So based on this, we will have to prioritize these risks for risk treatment. And the other sources for identifying risks are from our cybersecurity threat intelligence feeds, the vulnerability assessment programs that we conduct, and any changes in the processes within the organization. We should also ensure that we are using only authorized hardware and softwares within the organizations, and we are also properly categorizing the suppliers and performing proper due diligence on these suppliers before taking their services so that we are managing the risks effectively. Then we have the improvement function. So information security and risk management should always be an ongoing activity within the organization. So in order to ensure that we are continually improving the security posture, so we have to ensure that we are continually improving the security posture. So thereby increasing the maturity levels within the organization. So we need to identify all the possible processes and operations for improvement. So we can conduct periodic security assessments, periodic audits, or periodic assessments on the organizational process in order to ensure that we are continually improving the infosec posture within the organization. Next, we have the protect function. So the protect function predominantly focuses on or emphasizes on setting up or putting controls or safeguards in place in order to manage cybersecurity risks effectively within the organization. So at first, we have the identity management, authentication, and access control. So this function predominantly focuses on your identity and access management lifecycle. So starting from giving a unique IDs to your employees. So these unique IDs can be in terms of an employee ID, a unique mail ID, a salary code, or a unique employee reference number. So we have to ensure each individual within the organization, it might be employee, a contractor, or a third party, every individual should have a unique identification. And we have to ensure that the privileges are assigned based on their job roles after getting an appropriate approvals. So the typical identity and access management life cycle involves firstly creating the identities, then assigning privileges based on the job roles, then managing these identities and privileges throughout their service, and finally removing or deleting the privileges and the identities. So as part of providing access to our organization systems and information, we have to have a proper authentication mechanisms. So there are typically three types of authentication, which involves something you know, that is any password or any PIN, then something you have, that is any OTPs that you get, or any RFID cards that you have, or any uh, tokens that you get, and finally something you are, which involves your biometric authentication, facial recognition, voice recognition, right? So these are the three methods of authentication. So we can use more than one, that is the combination of two authentication mechanisms that will become your multi-factor authentication. And we should also emphasize on managing the physical access as well. So within the organization, we have to ensure that not all the individuals have access to all the parts of the organization. Wherever we have any sensitive areas or any restricted areas, that access should be managed to only limited individuals who actually need the access. Also, physical access management also involves managing the visitors within the organization. Next, we have the awareness and training. Again, a very important function. So this module or this function focuses on two types of training. One is a generic security awareness training, which is given to all the employees of the organization, which focuses on the organization's information security best practices, the information security objectives, the information security policies, what are the best practices with regards to information security. And then we have a role specific training where we customize the training for a particular role. For example, say network administrator, software developers. For software developers, we customize the training and we provide training in terms of OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. What are the best practices for coding? How can the development team ensure that they are coding securely? Right? So IT administrator. So we can provide or customize training as to how the IT administrator has to configure the assets before deploying in the network. What are the best practices that needs to be considered for configuring or hardening these assets? So like this, we can customize the security awareness for a job specific role. Next, we have the data security. So the organization has data in various forms and formats. And this data can be stored in assets such as the databases, hard drives, the laptops, mobile phones, tablets, desktops, removable media, etc. And there is always a constant flow of data to and from the organization. Hence, we need to ensure that we are securing the data that is at rest, the data that is in motion, and the data while it is being used. So the data must also be backed up on a periodic basis based on the criticality. Per se, there is an incident, for example, a ransomware or a malware attack, which corrupts all the data within the organization. So in that case, these backups that we had taken will help us to restore to our normal working conditions and helps us to restore the processes. Next, we have platform security. So this function predominantly focuses on securing all the assets basically that the organization has. So the organization has to firstly identify what are the various assets that is being used. For example, servers, network devices, laptops, desktops, wireless access points, the physical access control systems. So all the assets has to be identified, or all the categories of the electronic and physical assets need to be identified. And we need to develop the baseline configuration requirements for each and every asset. Say a particular server, what are the minimum requirements or what are the minimum security configurations that should be present before deploying this asset to the network. So we should manage all the hardwares and softwares. And finally, we should also restrict the installation of softwares. So we shouldn't give the administrative privileges to the endpoints, sorry, the employees. So the administrative privileges on the endpoints should always reside with the organization's IT team. So any employee who, if they want to install any application, they need to first reach out to the IT team, get a proper approvals, and then they would be given an administrative privilege for a very short period of time so that they can finish the installation. Next, we have the technology infrastructure resiliency. So here we need to basically focus on all of our net data that is present on the network, and all the assets that the organization has or the organization uses in order to store the organization's information. And these assets should be protected against the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So all the resilience requirements that the organization needs should be identified, and the organization should identify the capacity requirements of these assets. So we have to identify what is the current capacity that the organization is having and what is the future expected capacity based on the growth of the business, so that we ensure that we have adequate assets and capacity of the assets are maintained in order to cater to the demand. Up next, we have the detect function. So the detect function emphasize or focuses on identifying or spotting all the possible cybersecurity attacks or compromises within the organization. So it helps us to identify and analyze any unusual activities or any signs of cybersecurity attack in advance. So by detecting these anomalies early, we can respond quickly and effectively so that we minimize the impact of these incidents or any anomalous events. But first, we have continuous monitoring. So we have to ensure that all the data that is residing on the organization's network and is monitored to spot any sort of anomalous activities or any malicious data. And not only the network of the organization, we should also monitor the physical environment in order to spot any malicious activities that are happening or that are ongoing within the organization itself. So we can use some sort of a CCTV cameras or some sort of contact sensors in order to identify any malicious activities. And also all the activities of the organization's employees, service providers, vendors, third parties, and mainly the administrators should also be monitored in order to identify if there are any malicious or any anomalous activity that is going on. So next we have adverse event analysis. So once we identified or once we started the monitoring, with this monitoring mechanism we can identify all the anomalous activities, but there might be a chances that there are many false positive. Not all the events would be malicious, right? So first we have to understand what is the event. We have to analyze the event. We can use informations from different sources so that we can correlate them and come to a conclusion whether the event that was triggered or a alert that was triggered was a true positive or was it a false positive. And if at all it is a valid event and it is a malicious event, we have to understand what is the impact and what is the scope of this event. So this we can also have a threat intelligence in place that we receive from various organizations across the globe, so that we can identify and be prepared to the threats that are currently present in the organization. So that this will help us to effectively detect any threats, any vulnerabilities, any risks that are present in the internet. Next, we have the respond. So after identifying and analyzing these security events, if at all we got to know that there is any information security incident, now we should also respond to this incident, right? So this respond function predominantly focuses on taking actions whenever the cybersecurity incidents are detected. So it is all about containing the effects of the incident in order to minimize the damage. But first, we have the incident management function or a requirement. So firstly, we should have an incident response plan, which clearly identifies what are the steps that needs to be taken in order to effectively respond to a incident. So this should have a plan of what are the steps that we need to take in order to effectively manage the incident. We should also have a process in place in order to categorize the incident, whether it is a high level incident, it is a medium level incident, or a low level incident. So based on the categorization, we should also prioritize. So we should have a timelines or SLAs defined. All the high level incidents shall be responded in or shall be mitigated in so and so time frame. All the medium level or all the medium impact incidents shall be addressed in so and so timelines. We should also have a process for escalating the situation wherever possible or wherever necessary. Next, we have the incident analysis. So we got to know it is an incident. We also have defined the incident response plan. But we should also have a understanding as to what exactly went wrong. What went wrong? Why did the event actually happen? What was the loophole? What was the actual reason? So if we understand this root cause for the incident or an event, we will be in a better position to effectively mitigate the incident within the organization without escalating it to a greater extent. So all the evidence that we collect as part of the incident analysis and incident mitigation should be protected, and the magnitude of this incident should also be understood. So all the stakeholders should be notified wherever possible and to whatever levels that are needed. And the last control is the incident mitigation. So once we've identified the root cause for the incident, we have to take decision, or we have to take steps to firstly contain the incident so that it is not spreading to other assets in the network, and we have to take steps in order to eliminate the incident or eradicate the incident from the organization. So the last function we have is the recover. So this function predominantly focuses on getting things back to normal after a cybersecurity incident. So it involves restoring any assets or any operations that were affected by the incident promptly. So the goal is to minimize the impact of the incident and ensure that normal operations resume smoothly. So it's all about bouncing back from a cybersecurity incident as quickly and efficiently as possible. First, we have the incident recovery plan execution. So once we have eradicated the incident, it is time to recover the processes back to its previous normal working condition. So how do we know which process to restore first? So we usually perform an activity called as business impact analysis, where we identify what are the process that needs to be restored first. So in what timelines we need to restore it. Also, what is the amount of data that needs to be restored? So this data we get from terminologies called as RTO and RPOs. So based on this, we select and prioritize the processes and the data that needs to be restored. And we have to also ensure that the backups that we had taken should be should be useful in order to ensure that they actually help us in recovering from the incidents. So we have to also have a proper restoration schedule for the backups, so that we on a periodic basis we are actually restoring these backups to check whether they are actually working and whether we have the capability to restore the data in an event of a disaster or an incident. And last, we have incident recovery communication. So once we recover from an incident, we should communicate that to all the relevant stakeholders, and also we have to give updates to the general public. Say for example, whenever a very big application like for example Twitter or Instagram or WhatsApp or Facebook is down, everybody panics, and we see all the social media and on all the news channels stating that Instagram is down, WhatsApp is down, Facebook is down, Twitter is down. So then everybody will wait for Instagram or the affected company to actually confirm what actually went wrong. Was it any technical glitch or was it an incident? And once the organization says it's an incident, now again everybody would be waiting to hear that the incident is recovered, so that they can use the application to normal extent as they were using before. That is why communication is very important. So this was the last control, and this was it for today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending the webinar, for more such security content, webinars, please follow Ministry of Security on LinkedIn, Instagram, as well as YouTube. So we'll provide links to all our channels, that is LinkedIn, YouTube, also for Instagram on the description. So please follow us for more such InfoSec content. Thank you so much. Let's catch up in the next webinar. Bye-bye.